Dear friends, thank you for supporting this channel on Patreon to join our growing family of donors, now 59 patrons strong. And remember, once we reach 100 active patrons, we will start sending out a 1-ounce U.S. Silver Eagle, autographed by your host, Donegan Kaiser, to one active supporter each and every month. Thanks for taking a minute to pitch in by going to patreon.com/ReluctantPreppers and pledging your support today. Thanks very much.
As a responsible person with growing concerns for your privacy and personal liberty, you want to know where we're headed and what you can do about it. We ask the experts what you need to do to take prudent and responsible action to safeguard your family's wealth and well-being, and what basic first steps will help you to be aware and prepared. ReluctantPreppers.com.
You've painted a rather sobering and bleak picture that's even, I think, more grim than a lot of people who've been talking about this potential of an economic collapse, because you're talking about a very, very dangerous situation there. And you even mentioned in passing that you believe the people who are some of the puppet masters or architects behind this already have made their preparations, the elite. So could you take us now into the chapter where we will talk about what you are an expert at is this sort of this deep defensive architecture and strategic site selection. And I have a feeling we're going to run out of time. We'll have to have you back to talk about that in more detail in various parts, but could you give us at least a taste of what are some of the key considerations that people need to think about, both in selecting the place that they want to be, and how they're going to be able to get there, and what they need to have prepared as far as the layout of the architecture or whatever that's going to be more survivable for them?
Great questions. Let's first of all talk about a little bit about site selection and how you get there. Now, to be frank, most people can't leave the cities because that's where their jobs are. I deal with this and have dealt with it for 40 years. Most people cannot leave to a safe location. So most people in your audience are going to be people who have to stay near a major city or metropolitan area in order to survive financially. You can do that. You don't have to get out in the boondocks to survive, but it becomes more difficult when you're in a high-density area. As I point out in strategic relocation, high-density populations are your biggest enemy at all. I mean, even if you're in a rural area in New Jersey, the population density in the major cities of New York City and New Jersey, etc., are 1,000 people per square mile. When they start to spread out, they're going to inundate even the farming communities, so that you really don't have the low density that you thought you had when you started out. One thing that people need to understand in preparing a retreat, and I talk about this in the book, for example, every major metropolitan area, I show areas which develop certain criteria. First of all, they're in the periphery of the suburban areas so that you're not in the middle of anything. Now, if you work in the city, you have to make a plan to make sure, how do I get to my rural or semi-suburban home, and then how do I get out of that area? If the roads get clogged like in Katrina, where all the freeways became parking lots, you don't get on a freeway. But even if you don't get on a freeway in a crisis or trying to get back to your home, you have to make sure that every one of the beltways that go around the city are like moats. They are blockades that you cannot get past, except in 2 or 3 places in every sector.
That's right.
There are underpasses or overpasses on those freeways that do not coincide with an exit or of the freeway or an entrance. And that's important to know, because if there's an exit or an entrance, they're going to be clogged getting on. You won't be able to get underneath the freeway there at that clogged area. But there are every beltway, you have overpasses or underpasses, just a few of them, that have no entrance or exit, and you can get past the moat. So I point out how to go on Google Maps. You just follow around those freeways, and you find those overpasses or underpasses, and you map your route to be able to get past these barriers. And you don't even take secondary roads. You want to make sure you get on the suburban residential streets, because those will have cars, but they usually won't be blocked. So that's one of the things about how to do. Remember, too, that it's important in designing how to get out that you avoid your major exit points from a city. People will generally tend toward the freeway. When those get clogged, they'll take the freeway alternative roads around there, and it'll gradually lessen out when you get into the rural areas where people think those are going to be clogged, I won't go there. But they won't be clogged generally. And so you want to make sure that your house, is not on a major thorough for getting away. When you pick a rural suburban area to pick at the periphery of where the city you've got to live, I try to recommend people to look for specific criteria of safety. One of those is, and a lot of people ask me, how many miles away from a city or a freeway should I be? And I said, that's irrelevant. You want specific criteria, meaning you want to be basically pick an area that isn't visible from a major secondary road. In other words, you're not going to be the house when people run out of gas that they come to because you're right beside or visible from the road. Be out some little lane that goes around. There are trees in front of it so that they don't see your property. So that kind of specific criteria, I can locate people within a mile or two of the freeway. If there's no exit for 20 miles, they can't get to you from that freeway any better than anyone else. So those are some basic ideas when you're in the city of how to avoid getting trapped. So you can, first of all, relocate within the city outside to the suburban areas, outside of major exit areas to get some security. Most people need to get, I think, some provision for a retreat even beyond that. Meaning if it becomes untenable, as it will be within 2 or 3 days with a total electronic meltdown, you try growing a garden, for example, in a suburban backyard with everybody looking over the fence waiting for those tomatoes to get ripe. I don't believe in shooting people who are just hungry. So you have to be able to find, and whether this usually involves cooperating with other people, with family, friends, or other people having some rural farm property that isn't surrounded by suburban areas where you can grow a garden. I think that there's going to be famine this first year of the war. So I think it's good to have stored food and prepared, but you're going to have to be able to grow something for at least 1 year in order to survive. So I recommend you do need a retreat type property. My highest recommendations in strategic relocation are the Intermountain West. Population density around 35 people per square mile. It's got lots of desert and mountainous areas so that, for example, from Salt Lake City, which is not a good area because of its corrupt density, urban population, but the whole area generally outside that city is pretty safe. It's 700 miles through trackless desert to Los Angeles. It's 1,100 miles to San Francisco. It's 800 miles to Portland, Oregon. It's 500 miles to Denver through trackless Rockies. So those are the kinds of areas where refugee flows will not be able to get there. One other point I will make about planning your strategic relocation within a metropolitan area, suburban areas between you and the urban area are your friend because they will absorb refugees. If you get out in an area, you're the only person between a major suburban area, and that suburban area is coming towards you. But you see, if you have suburban areas between you and the danger zones, they will absorb a lot of refugees, give you time to maneuver, time to react. A lot of people don't think about that. They think all population's your enemy. But in a crisis, some of those homes can be your friend because they absorb it first and give you time to react. So let's talk about the home itself.
Yes.
There's two basic types of high security homes which we consider when we design. One is the suburban residence, which is going to be at some threat to social unrest. The other is the real retreat home, which you're not going to be living in most of the time. The retreat home, for example, has to have a lot of high security features that the suburban home may not have because of the fact it's unoccupied. And you want to make sure that when you do need to get it, that it won't be ransacked when you get there. And so every retreat home that we have has a completely concealed basement space, and we only recommend retreat homes in areas where you can build a basement. And because you want to be able to secure all your valuables, all your food supplies, everything that you really want inside that area, and it's concealed so that you don't even know there's a basement. There are no daylight basements, there's no windows to it, etc. And thus, if hunters break into the cabin or whatever it is, they still can't find what's there. So that's an essential strategy in terms of making sure a retreat is still a retreat when you get there. The suburban home, believe it or not, you don't need that kind of security because the threats are going to be so significant that you do not want to try to defend a suburban home with wooden walls, etc., with guns. They can always bring up a bigger gun and put holes in your walls, and you're just asking for it. So the strategy is to have a safe room, once again in a basement where it's preferable, whereby you can get out of the way, leave your doors open, leave a few things, refugees come in, take what they want, and they move on. Rather than trying to shoot it out with some refugees, which is not a good thing to start with. It's best to get out of the way so that you don't have to confront them. For example, when we design secure safe rooms, we like a double layer of security. We want to see a storage room in front of the safe room, and the storage room is concealed, for example, so that if they do find that, there's a little cheap gun safe in it, has a few trinkets and other things, and they think they found the safe room. They think they found the secure room, but you're not there. Very rarely will they think to look at it for another concealed door inside the safe room or inside the secure storage room to get to the actual safe room. And it's also important to have an exit from that safe room. You don't want to be stuck in a concrete box with people wheeling in a welding torch to try to get through your secure door and threaten you. You want to be able to always get out of the way if you can, is the preferable strategy rather than confront. At least that's my philosophy. So the safe rooms that we design in a regular suburban home will have a total concrete envelope around them, including on the ceiling. We do not design bunkers for people or bomb shelters. If people are in a target area, which is in a 5-mile circle of destruction wherever there's a nuclear weapon potential,
yes,
they need to relocate. Don't spend an extra $30,000 in bomb-proofing and special blast valves when you could spend that money to relocate. I mean, in other words, don't camp out near a military air base. It's easy enough to relocate. Times are good enough that you can do that. So there are a lot of shelters, for example, that are buriable shelters that you see them advertised all over the web. I really don't like those for a couple of reasons. One, they come on a big semi-truck with a crane on them, and everybody in the neighborhood's going to know for miles around that you put in, and they'll all call it a bomb shelter, even if you don't, when you put it in the ground. In addition, all the vents have to come out of the ground and be concealed in some way. And then there has to be a hatch. The neighbors all knowing about that, if you need that someday, what happens if there are 15, 20 people camped out around your entrance and you can't get inside? So you see, I always recommend that a safe room or shelter be built under an existing structure or under a structure that you build over the top of it. And if you do that, a concrete basement with a concrete lid is the cheapest way to get stand-up space compared to these steel round tank type shelters. And so I really recommend the basement type space. In fact, we have a book called the High Security Shelter Book, which talks about how to do one of these out of concrete block within an existing basement. And it's the cheapest by far way to get a safe room, is to wall off a portion of the building with concrete block, put in a secure door, and then you lower the ceiling with steel decking, and you put pre-cast concrete block on top, stack it all the way across, and you get radiation protection and fireproofing and soundproofing from this type of design. And the reason we don't recommend bomb shelter, but we do recommend fallout protection, is that it's relatively easy to do fallout protection. It only takes about 12 inches of concrete in most places to give people a protection factor of 40. That means it cuts any radiation by 1/40th, which is a lot. Makes it survivable. And so that, because you see, anywhere in the United States, east of the West Coast, you can get fallout. Seattle will be hit because of the dozens of military bases. San Diego will be hit, San Francisco, the LA area. All of those areas have military targets, and that fallout is flowing eastward, either eastward to the north or eastward to the south.
Because of the prevailing westerly winds?
Because of the prevailing westerly winds.
Okay.
And so almost everybody in the United States needs to prepare for fallout, and it's relatively inexpensive, but it's part of the security package, because properly designed shelter becomes an earthquake-resistant box that you can survive an earthquake in. It's a fire-resistant box if the house burns down. Even in good times, if a wife or family is at home and you have an intruder, rather than confront them, they can go into the safe room where you have cell phone communication through an outside antenna. You have air, you have water, you have everything you need so that they can wait for help to arrive. So the safe room is an integral part of a high security residence. Now, as I want to emphasize, we want to make sure that the residence doesn't look like a high security residence.
Right.
Even when we do high security shutters, either the roll down variety or the swinging variety, we always make sure that they have normal wooden shutters on top of the ballistic steel underneath them, so that you can't tell until they're closed that they're a high security shutter. Very important little details like that some people don't think about.
When people want to find out more about these options, it sounds like your books are a good place to start, and they've had multiple editions of them as you've updated them throughout the years. In terms of cost range for people, people might think, oh my gosh, this stuff sounds interesting, but it's way out of reach, except for the ultra rich. Is that true or false?
It's absolutely false. It isn't cheap. But for example, in the average suburban home, let's say $3,000 to $4,000, prices are going up. You're going to add $100,000 to the cost to do everything from a security system to a safe room that is done in addition or underneath a garage. One of my favorite places to put a safe room is under a garage, because most people don't expect a basement to be under a garage. It's very easy to conceal that way. And it's got the garage on top of it, so your ventilation can come up in the walls. Your filters, one of the things we specialize in the book is how to find nuclear, biological, chemical filter alternatives to the $6,000 to $12,000 military grade filters. And we've got lots of resources in the book of that type of how to do that, using medical grade filters that do the same thing, and HEPA filters. But if you do it yourself, for example, this high security shelter book, for example, this in the basement itself, building a shelter, that can be built in about $3,000 worth of material. So that's not that expensive. Most people can afford that by saving up over a period of time if you do the work yourself. And I recommend that highly. A lot of people say, well, I'm not mechanically inclined. Well, get that way. I'll tell you, I've had millionaire clients that I've designed homes for that are going to be out of luck because they don't know how to fix anything. And they don't know how to use tools. I mean, everything has maintenance. Sophisticated solar systems, security systems. You know, and I did my best to write a manual about how to do this type of thing, but I still get calls from the clients saying, how do I do this? Look in the manual, the page so-and-so. So it does pay to learn how to do things, even if it costs you time. I mean, you can learn to fix cars, you can learn to fix your appliances, you can learn to fix little security systems. You can learn almost anything on YouTube anymore. It's amazing what you can find.
We certainly rely on a lot of YouTube information for sharing in the preparedness community. One of the concerns that I have about a suburban location is the reliance on domestic supplies for water, electric power, and natural gas particularly, and sewer. Can you talk to us about how you recommend people overcome dependence on those for their vital needs?
Yes, and this is one of the areas that does cost money in your preparedness self-sufficiency. You need to have backup for electricity. And we do recommend generally diesel generators only because diesel can be stored and it can be hauled by hand. The problem with most people's natural gas or propane generators is natural gas can be cut off in an earthquake. Propane is a limited supply. The largest tank you can get is 1,000 gallons, and it's variable, but it only holds about 800 gallons. You could squeeze 850 into it if you tell the person to really up pressure. But when that 850 gallons is gone, you can't hook up easily even a 5-gallon tank to that. You can if you have the fittings, but you can't go down to the local gas tank if there's no electricity and get those filled, because it requires a special pump to refill those. It requires a truck coming out. But propane's better than nothing, and so we don't recommend that for generators that can go through a lot of fuel. Diesel, for example, has at least twice the energy storage capacity and it diesel fuel doesn't really go bad, especially if you keep water from getting into it, it just doesn't go bad, unlike gasoline. So we like diesel generators. We also like solar. And there's a whole new bunch of technology which we cover in the Secure Home, self-consumption technology, which allows you to use the solar energy from the panels directly in the house without going through the batteries. Before this technology, everything had to go into the battery and everything go out of the battery. It wears out the battery. Fortunately, we have the new lithium ion phosphate batteries, 10 times more expensive than lead acid, but they last 20 times longer. So they are now the best, most cost-efficient type of solar battery, and they just don't go bad. You can cycle them 300 times. You try doing that with, 10,000 times you can do a lithium-ion phosphate battery. Try doing that with lead acid. It just doesn't work. So the solar industry is coming around. We can talk at some other time in a lot of detail about solar because there is no company right now that provides us everything that we need in the self-sufficiency range, which was 2 sources of AC input, power diversion, off-grid, on-grid, compatibility with lithium phosphate batteries. There's no company that does all of that yet. I think it will happen within the next year or so, but we're still watching that an awful lot. Water storage, people need to absolutely store water. And one of the cheapest and easiest ways is in an area where you can, if you're not in a house that's sandwiched 5 feet away from another house, is you can put a plastic cistern outside your foundation, drill through the foundation, and use a small 24 or 12 volt RV pump to pressurize your own house system. There's some code issues. Code doesn't like you to have access to anything other than chlorinated, fluoridated water from the supply, so you have to violate a few codes to get this other supply. But that's what we preppers do. You got to do what it takes to get the water that you need. Short of a cistern out there, you can put in an extra water tank. If you have gas, I like to see an electric tank as the second tank, plumbed so that you can use either one if you have electricity or natural gas to heat the water. Or you use the one that isn't being used just to store water. It's not hot, it's just being used as a preheat to going into the other. So that's a minimum thing that's usually doable in most homes, is to add an extra water tank in there for water storage. Short of that, I buy orange juice in these big Mylar jugs and things. I always fill them up with water afterwards and store them and stockpile them away. I happen to have a self-sufficient house with a well. But even with that well can go out. And even though I have a spare well, I want to have portable water supply that I can use to drink. You just can't have enough water in an emergency situation.
And for preventing freezing in winter conditions in a home where you could lose both electric and natural gas?
I like to see wood heat as an alternative heat. If you have natural gas, I prefer to have at least a propane tank to service your shelter for your small propane stove. And I like these propane wall heaters. They are 100% efficient. They don't give off any appreciable carbon monoxide, and so you can put one of those in the shelter, or you can put them in a basement, duct it to your propane tank, and you can at least get some minimal heat. If you don't have access to a wood stove, which the chimney is probably the most expensive thing in a house, is remodeling to put in a wood stove capable chimney, but it can be done. You can go into alternatives such as water heating through a wood stove. We talk about that in the Secure Home using a thermosiphon system. I'll tell you, my wife tells me that that's the most valuable thing in our survival preparations is hot water.
Hot water.
Especially in the wintertime.
It's remarkable. Having been on some extensive canoeing or backpacking wilderness trips, it's amazing how your mind just starts to focus down on, if I could only get to a toilet and a pillow and some hot water, I could really get back to life. Well,
absolutely right.
We've been speaking with Joel Skousen. He is the editor and founder of the World Affairs Brief newsletter. He is an expert on both political affairs as well as strategic site selection and defensive architecture. Joel, I can tell already that we were well advised to bring you on as a guest, and we're going to have you come back in and give us some more details in these varied areas of great interest to our audience. Thank you so much for joining us this first time here on Reluctant Preppers.
My pleasure to be with you. Let's do it again sometime.